We gather today with sadness, but with hope.
Tonight, a final farewell. Family, friends, and colleagues celebrate the life of Senator Edward Kennedy.
He lifted me up in his strong, gentle arms and said something I will never forget. He said, "I know you can do it."
I'm Jeff Glor. Also tonight, at least a dozen dangerous wildfires rage in California, forcing evacuations. And investigators search for answers in the bizarre California kidnapping case that took 18 years to solve.
This is the CBS Evening News with Jeff Glor.
And good evening. As he moves toward his final resting place tonight, Senator Edward Kennedy has made the journey from his family home in Massachusetts to his political home in Washington. Hundreds of old friends and colleagues waited for hours at the U.S. Capitol so they could say a final goodbye. You are looking at a live picture this evening. We will return there in a moment, but we begin our coverage this evening in Boston, where President Obama was joined by 3 former presidents, dozens of members of Congress, and the Kennedy family for a funeral mass. National correspondent Jim Axelrod is there. Jim?
Jeff, the Kennedy family chose this church because of its special meaning to Senator Kennedy as a place of hope and optimism. They wanted an uplifting farewell. Ted Kennedy's casket was met by an honor guard and escorted into the Basilica of Our Lady of Perpetual Help, where his widow and children were joined by 1,500 mourners.
We pray for our dear friend and brother, Ted Kennedy.
In many ways, it had all the trappings of a state funeral. Former presidents, senators and cabinet secretaries, movie stars, and world-famous musicians, all gathered in an ornate church, a eulogy from the sitting president.
He was given the gift of time that his brothers were not, and he used that gift to touch as many lives and right as many wrongs as the years would allow.
But when Ted Kennedy's grandchildren offered the prayer of the faithful, using their grandpa's own words.
For my grandfather's brave promise last summer that the work begins anew, the hope rises again, and the dream lives on. We pray to the Lord.
This grand funeral became a family affair.
For my grandfather's commitment and persistence, not to outworn values, but to old values that will never wear out. That the poor may be out of political fashion, but they are never without human need.
4 days of deeply felt emotion here in Boston reached its high point when his 2 sons rose to remember.
He was not perfect, far from it, but my father believed in redemption, and he never surrendered, never stopped trying to right wrongs, be they the results of his own failings or of ours.
Teddy Kennedy Jr. lost his right leg to cancer when he was 12. A few months later, there was a snowfall.
My father went to the garage to get the old flexible flyer and asked me if I wanted to go sledding down the steep driveway. And I was trying to get used to my new artificial leg, and the hill was covered with ice and snow, and it wasn't easy for me to walk. I slipped and I fell on the ice, and I started to cry. And I said, I can't do this. I said, I'll never be able to climb up that hill. And he lifted me up in his strong, gentle arms and said something I will never forget. He said, "I know you can do it. There is nothing that you can't do. We're going to climb that hill together, even if it takes us all day." You see, my father taught me that even our most profound losses are survivable. And it is what we do with that loss, our ability to transform it into a positive event, that is one of my father's greatest lessons. He taught me that nothing is impossible.
Patrick was his youngest, a congressman from Rhode Island.
My cousin Joe was a member of Congress, and I came to Congress. Dad finally celebrated, saying, finally, after all these years, when someone says, "Who does that damn Kennedy think he is?" there's only a 1 in 3 chance they're talking about me.
But politics wasn't center stage. Patrick recalled the severe asthma that plagued him as a boy and the medication that gave him terrible headaches.
While asthma may have posed a challenge to my physical health, it propped up my emotional and mental health because it kept my father by my bedside. My dad was always sure to be within reach of me, and the side effects of the medication meant that he was always holding a cold, wet towel on my forehead until I fell asleep again from my headache.
President Obama had the last word on the man whose support was critical in his winning the White House.
The greatest expectations were placed upon Ted Kennedy's shoulders because of who he was, but he surpassed them all because of who he became. We do not weep for him today because of the prestige attached to his name or his office. We weep because we loved this kind and tender hero who persevered through pain and tragedy, not for the sake of ambition or vanity, not for wealth or power, but only for the people and the country that he loved.
Politics weren't entirely absent today, even if they took a back seat. Ted Kennedy Jr. said in his eulogy, quote, "My father taught me some of life's toughest lessons, such as how to like Republicans." Both Democrats and Republicans in the church broke up laughing. Jeff?
All right, Jim Axelrod in Boston tonight. Jim, thank you very much. As we mentioned, hundreds of friends and colleagues waited at the U.S. Capitol as well for hours to say goodbye to the senator who walked the halls of Congress for nearly 50 years. Nancy Cordes is there tonight. Nancy, good evening to you.
Good evening to you, Jeff, and it's very sweet. Just a few moments ago, we saw Senator Kennedy's wife, Vicki, blowing kisses to the thousands upon thousands of people who have gathered here for hours at the U.S. Capitol in that heat and humidity that Washington is famous for in August, just to say goodbye. And now we see that Senator Kennedy's son, who is a U.S. representative, is also thanking the crowd of people. All those people that you see on the Senate steps of the U.S. Capitol are former or current members of Senator Kennedy's staff, hundreds of them. When you serve the Senate for 47 years, you amass quite a staff, and the reputation of his staff always was that they were the best staff at the Capitol. Also in the crowd, dozens of lawmakers who went to Boston this morning for the funeral, then flew back down to Washington during recess to say goodbye one last time. Originally, this was supposed to be a very brief affair, just a stop at the Capitol on the way to Arlington National Cemetery. But as you can see, it has grown to much more than that. We heard a very brief prayer from the House chaplain, and then everyone joined together in singing "America the Beautiful." From here, the family will get back in the motorcade, and the hearse will make its way to Arlington National Cemetery for a sunset burial. Jeff?
All right, Nancy Cordes on Capitol Hill tonight. Nancy, thank you. As Nancy mentioned, on a hill in Arlington National Cemetery, near the graves of his brothers John and Robert, Ted Kennedy will be laid to rest this evening. Wyatt Andrews now reports on how that spot was chosen. Wyatt?
Jeff, good evening. It has long been Ted Kennedy's dream to join his brothers Jack and Bobby here at Arlington National Cemetery. But the story of how this political family came here to this military cemetery is one that began by accident. The Kennedys' appreciation for Arlington started when President John Kennedy decided to take a random Sunday drive. It was March of 1963, 8 months before his assassination.
It was a late day, late winter day.
According to journalist and author Robert Poole, Kennedy happened to drive to the cemetery and then decided to walk this hill.
He walked to about where we are.
As the president absorbed the view overlooking the Lincoln Memorial, Poole says he foretold his fate.
First he says, "Wouldn't this be a great place for the White House?" And the second thing he says is, "So beautiful, I could stay here forever." Of course, it proved to be sadly prophetic statement, because a few months later he was dead, and this is where he ended up forever.
The day after John Kennedy was shot, as he lay in the Capitol Rotunda, Jackie Kennedy slipped away to visit Arlington. Finding a spot on that very same hill and on the same straight line facing the Lincoln Memorial, she decided the president would come here, not to Massachusetts.
She said that she wanted him here so that he would belong to the country.
What the country saw next had never been seen before on live television. Not just a presidential burial, but the precise, dignified ceremonies of an Arlington military burial.
It was the first glimpse that most of the American public had at how special Arlington is and how we honor our heroes here.
During that ceremony, Jackie passed the president's eternal flame to his brothers. First to Bobby, who after his assassination was buried here in 1968, and then to Ted. Jackie herself would come to rest here in 1994. But after Kennedy's internment, military requests for burial here almost doubled. Visits by tourists quadrupled, and Arlington, which was always a place of high honor, became a place of national communion. To get to the Kennedy gravesite, millions of people every year pass by the hundreds of thousands of war heroes who'd come before. And no one understood that better than Senator Edward Kennedy.
Each and every time you could see in his eyes and his words that he's truly knew what Arlington meant.
Now Ted Kennedy is just hours away from getting his last request fulfilled of joining his brothers. And it's going to happen in a spot just down the hill and just steps away from where John Kennedy first wished he could stay here forever. Jeff?
Wyatt Andrews at Arlington, Ted Kennedy's final resting place tonight. Wyatt, thank you. And we'll be right back. In California tonight, firefighters are battling a dozen wildfires. The worst covers almost 12 square miles near Los Angeles. Hattie Kaufman is there with more tonight. Hattie?
Jeff, the winds have begun to gust, which is going to make it just more difficult for firefighters who are already battling scorching temperatures, steep terrain, and thick brush 30 feet tall. Overnight, the station fire north of Los Angeles exploded. Homeowners in the suburb of La Cañada were forced to flee.
We heard this huge explosion, which really scared us, so we decided it was time to leave.
Evacuations intensified today.
Loading up the car, we have to evacuate. Mandatory evacuation now.
Families had to decide what to take and what to leave behind. In Northern California, some didn't have that luxury. This couple lost their home.
I just thank God that I'm still here.
12 fires are ablaze in California, 4 of them major. More than 12,000 acres have been consumed, most in Southern California, bone dry after years of drought. Steep slopes that haven't burned in half a century are hungry to go up in flames, making the station fire extremely volatile.
Do not risk your lives to save your home, save your life, and let the public safety save your home.
If burning neighborhoods weren't bad enough, the fire is climbing up Mount Wilson, the critical site of LA's broadcast towers.
If it goes out, this news conference is done because we won't have any telecommunications.
This community gathered as the fires burned, but soon were ordered out.
This is the shocker, but we're as ready as we're going to be, I guess.
That is downtown Los Angeles, which gives you some idea just how close this very large fire is to the city. Jeff?
Hattie Kaufman in Los Angeles tonight. Hattie, thank you. Police today searched the California home of a man charged this week in the kidnapping of a young girl 18 years ago, looking for evidence possibly linking him to other crimes. But anger is growing tonight that so many opportunities were missed. John Blackstone is following this case from Antioch.
It's now clear how often Philip Garrido and his wife Nancy fooled police and parole officers who again and again failed to see the tents and sheds of a backyard prison, leaving J.C. Dugard captive for 18 years. Garrido was apparently so confident he took J.C. out of the compound to help in his printing business. A real estate agent recognized her as the young woman who worked with Garrido.
Yes, that's no doubt.
There were warning signs about Garrido, sentenced to 50 years for kidnap and rape, but paroled after just 10. Even Garrido's father saw him as deeply troubled. blaming a head injury and drug use.
He's crazy. He's out of his head.
When a neighbor complained about what was happening in Garrido's backyard, the deputy who responded never looked behind the house. Not until Garrido showed up in Berkeley with the 2 girls he fathered with JC did a law enforcement officer become suspicious.
The one thing to point out that we noticed right away is the coloring of these 2 little girls. They were extremely pale.
That started the unraveling of a long mystery, freedom for JC, but not the end of her ordeal.
And it takes much longer to fix a person than to ruin a person. You can ruin a person in a half an hour. She had 18 years of it.
Looking back, the missed opportunities to discover this secret backyard prison make the tragic story of J.C. Dugard's kidnapping all the more disturbing. John Blackstone, CBS News, Antioch, California.
Just ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News, a look at Ted Kennedy in our Weekend Journal, the father figure for 28 Kennedy children. In his eulogy for Ted Kennedy, President Obama said Kennedy was the baby of the family who became the patriarch. That is the focus of tonight's Weekend Journal. Patriarch, it turned out, was a role he heartily embraced.
You run that way, all right? Can you run that way as fast as you can?
Besides his 3 children and 2 stepchildren, Ted Kennedy was a surrogate father to the kids left behind by his slain brothers. Robert Kennedy had 11.
Every single one of my brothers and sisters needed a father. And we gained one through Uncle Teddy. For so many of us, we just needed someone to hang on to. And Teddy was always there.
Always there for every baptism, graduation, and wedding. He walked one of President John Kennedy's 2 children, Caroline, down the aisle.
He showed us how to keep going no matter how hard things were, to love each other no matter how mad we got, and keep working for what we believe in. He convinced us that we could ace the next test, make the varsity team, win the next race, whether it was sailing or politics.
After Caroline's wedding, her mother, Jacqueline, wrote Ted a poignant letter, which then CBS News correspondent Gloria Borger recounted in this 2000 interview for 60 Minutes.
On you, the carefree youngest brother, fell a burden a hero would beg to be spared. Everyone is going to make it, because you were always there with your love. Jackie.
It's about as nice as you can get.
America is better because of the leadership of Edward Kennedy.
When John Kennedy Jr. was lost in a plane crash 10 years ago, Senator Kennedy took charge and took care of Caroline.
Ted Kennedy flew to her house on Long Island, spent an entire day with her, and even went out and played basketball with her kids.
In all, he had 28 nephews and nieces, and there were 60 kids who called him Great Uncle Teddy.
He had the skills to keep everything glued together, even though the family had been beset by such awful circumstances over the decades.
The Kennedys say that when word of his death came Tuesday, they lost the, quote, irreplaceable center of their large extended family.
It was a beautiful summer night. The moon had set. There was no wind. The sea was calm and the stars were out. I looked up and there was this one star hanging low in the sky that was just bigger than all the rest and brighter than all the rest, with a twinkle and a sparkle louder than all the others. I know it was Jupiter, but it was acting a lot like Teddy.
And when we come back in just a moment, more on the procession taking place in Washington right now. And we leave you tonight with a last look at today's celebration of the life of Edward Kennedy. I'm Jeff Glor, CBS News in New York. Good night.